Hi, I'm Jordan, and this is Whiskey for the People. Today, what I have here is one of my favorite whiskeys under $50. And rather than get into the bottle, give you some generic information, and really kind of cover the surface of this whiskey, I would rather start off by sharing a pour with you and giving you what I'm getting from it. And I think it's important to take these whiskeys and to share these things, these opinions, these recommendations from the perspective of the whiskey and its merits in its own right, not doing this hype marketing, super information centric type of approach, because we have enough of that, and it's good and it's useful in some ways. But at the end of the day, what really matters is when you sit down and you pour a glass of something and you spent X amount of money on it, does this whiskey, amount to something you enjoy, amount to something that you want to share, and something that hopefully not only enjoy, but maybe develops your palate a bit, or challenges you, or gives you a little more perspective, or helps you kind of fine tune or hone in on what it is that you do like. And I think that's the important thing if you're going to approach whiskey as a hobby, is to really find what you like, and to be able to develop an appreciation for that, so that you can more efficiently or more effectively find what it is that you like, so that you can spend more time drinking whiskey you enjoy, rather than just hurting your liver on stuff that, costs you some money and some time. So with that said, let me go ahead and get into this, and we'll come back a little bit later here and we'll talk about this bottle. But right away, I'm getting definitely a more peppery, a more punchy whiskey off the nose. I get some corn sweetness from it, but it's definitely a little bit dusty, a little bit dry, maybe more towards the herbal side of a bourbon, let's say. And maybe I just revealed a little bit too much right there. I'm not a pro at this. You're going to have to bear with me. So what? It's a bourbon. There's a lot of them out there, right? But yeah, to me, what I get right away is a high rye bourbon. And there's this distinctive kind of dusty sweet note that kind of almost always finishes or transitions, or what you last kind of remember on the nose is a little bit of this kind of punch, or this spice, and maybe a teensy bit of herb on it. So I think a lot of people would describe this note as floral. That's kind of how I break down or dissect floral from other familiar scents and flavors, is that it's sweet, but it's also got this little bit of a powdery thing to it. Maybe let's say a pollen-y type of thing, or just something that isn't just so sweet. It's got a kind of a base quality to it, or this again, I use the term too much, but developed quality to it, where it's not just singular or so one-dimensional, but there's something behind what you initially get from it that's most of the time, or oftentimes, at least for me, more in contrast to that. And so that's what you would, in my opinion, call something that is complex or developed, is that there's multiple things going on there, and oftentimes those things are in a little bit of contrast to each other, but let's say they somehow work, that they make sense and they balance each other out. So I'm getting that from this. And yeah, as I just sit here and get acquainted with it on the nose, it gets more herbal to me. And the more herbal it gets, and the more I come to kind of just know that the sweetness is there, and I'm looking past that while kind of still acknowledging it, so to speak, it becomes that much more floral to me. And I think the thing that kind of gives it almost that greeny, alive, greeny is not a great word, but a green, alive type of thing is that herbal note, that kind of a bit of a spice too. You know, if you take something fresh out of the ground, and especially if it's a green herb, or, you know, especially something like an onion or a shallot, and you were to break it or you were to bite into it, you would get a lot of things going on. First of all, I would say something that is kind of sharp, kind of bright, maybe even acidic. But then there would also be this kind of very alkaline or base or whatever you would have it, just kind of grainy, muted, dull type of thing going on, right? But you would smell all sorts of things. And, you know, if you rubbed your hands together, that would change too. Once it's got a little heat on it, or once it has some friction, once it has some agitation to it. So on this whiskey right here, the more I agitate it, the more I swirl it around and smell it, the more I just get settled in, realizing this is sweet, but it also has a very, very weighty balance to that sweetness, with some spice, with some herbal notes that would be more common of higher rye mash bills. So let's give it a taste. Wow. Yeah. Wow. This is so dynamic, so punchy, so explosive on the palate. Right away, the nose really is quite shy or modest. It doesn't lead you on to believe it knows as much as it does, or it has as much as it does, so to speak, on the palate there. On the palate, just right away, intense sweetness, but right there along with it, there's a lot of spice, a lot of pepper. There is definitely some good resistance on this whiskey. I wouldn't say that this is extremely thick or viscous or anything, but I would get something that would remind me of proof, where it's not necessarily so astringent, even though there is some astringency to it, but it just really is reactive to my palate and to my taste buds, to where it gives it some friction or some resistance to it. Like if you were pressing your tongue against the roof of your mouth, how that would just kind of become a little bit harder to do when you've got something that is so full of flavor and is so rich, right? There's a reaction there. And so on this, I get a whole lot of that. And let's try it again. Yeah. So now that I'm acquainted with it, it's not packing as much of a wallop when I try it on the palate here, but it still has so much flavor, and it really comes off to me as a big wall of flavor where you just kind of hit it, and it's just, you know, very, again, explosive. And then that kind of just spreads out and dissipates and coats the palate. And as it does that, you can pick apart some of those notes separately and kind of get an idea of how intense some of those are, where they fit in the mix. But on this, I initially just get so much sweetness. It's a very, very rich kind of honey. Again, that honeysuckle type of note, where it's lighter. It has more to it. It's a little bit sharp. I get brown sugar that comes right after that. You know, it kind of transitions from a little bit of this lighter, brighter, but also very rich note into something that's just kind of rich and really mellow and even and just sweet. Not necessarily super dark, but definitely darker than, let's say, honey or a honeysuckle type of note. Then the spice is what stands out to me. I get what, to me, I know to be rye spice. And so rye spice to me is something that initially is more of a sensation on my palate than it is necessarily a taste. There are certain spices to me. I mean, I know pepper, that has a taste or a flavor to me, and chilies, those have tastes, flavors that are kind of distinctive to me. But when it comes to rye spice, the first thing I usually get that indicates to me that it's rye and not something like just proof would be that I get a sensation, but the sensation doesn't affect the rest of the palate or dominate the other flavors that are coming out. And when that sensation kind of subsides a bit, what I get is something that definitely comes off as a little bit of black pepper to me, and something that then gets a little bit more bready, a little bit, it just reminds me of grain. I mean, rye is a grain, and it reminds me of this granular, maybe a little bit milly type of thing going on, that has just a slight breadish type of taste to it. And so I get the rye right after that sweetness. And with those things kind of, melting together on the palate and dispersing and coating the palate, it goes from right on the main, dead center part of my palate, on my tongue, on the middle of my tongue, to definitely my cheeks and the upper roof of my mouth towards my sinuses, to where there's almost a sensation in my sinuses from this whiskey. And I think that this goes into a finish that is pretty bold, with the spice kind of lingering and really making sure that it's known, but tapering off to a sweetness. And to be honest with you, even though it is a relatively short finish, I love it because it's just right there. You can clearly taste it, kind of tapers off, but it's very pleasant. There's nothing unpleasant that comes up, or as it dissipates, nothing gets funky or weird or kind of out of kilter. It's really nice. Let's taste it one more time here. Yeah, so excuse me, that proof getting to me there. This thing, for the only pour I've had today, is maybe a bit stout for me here. But yeah, it's so sweet. And again, that sweetness definitely has a couple layers to it. There's that brighter profile. It does go to a more developed or a darker sweetness, but the brighter profile and the darker profile are both very rich, very thick, kind of sweet. I wouldn't say syrupy, and I wouldn't say that the sweetness itself has this kind of maybe candied or caramelized thing going on. I don't think it kind of reaches that, but it definitely has this kind of chewiness to it or something going on. And then this time around, this third sip here, I got, again, on that rye spice, it was very short with that sensation or that kind of tingling, spiky, sparkly, whatever you would call it, on the palate. And I really got a lot of that grain, bready, milled, baked type of thing going on that swig. It really starts to taste like a very sweet bread. I kind of get a sweet sourdough thing going on. Even though it's rye, there's just so much sweetness there. It really tastes more like a sourdough bread to me. And I love this whiskey. I think this is a fantastic value for the money. I did buy this at under $50. And I think that if you're looking for something that is quality but is good value, and it doesn't have to be anything other than a good whiskey, and in this case it is a bourbon, I think that this is a great place to get acquainted with that kind of second tier of whiskey, that beyond something very simple This is not necessarily super complex, but it does have layers to it. And I really appreciate it for that, because I think this is a great transition whiskey, especially from, let's say, lower proof things to something that's got a little more punch to it, but also has so much flavor. It's not just going to be heat. It's not just going to be something that's hot to be hot or proofy to be proofy. This really has a lot of flavor to back up that proof. And so what we have here is the Bulleit Barrel Strength, and this is the batch 7. And I think this came out in 2023. I think this came out this year. And as you can see, I've enjoyed it here a little bit, and so have several friends. But yeah, this whiskey is, I think, one of the best values out there, especially with what's on the shelf. And a little background for it. So Bulleit, up into 2017, was sourcing their whiskeys from another Kentucky distillery that they had contract distill their distillate. Then they would barrel it and age it at their Diageo-owned Stitzel Weller, the historic distillery and site. They would age it there. And so this whiskey, as of this year, I'm not too sure where it comes from. I know it comes from Kentucky, but Diageo opened up a distillery, and we're about to lose video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut, and then I'm going to cut right back to you. Okay. And so with this bottle here, Diageo, and more specifically Bulleit, which Diageo owns, they made their own distillery in 2017. And I believe they carried over what they were kind of contract distilling in terms of at least the mash bill and I believe the yeast strain, and kind of continued the best they could on their own to produce what it was they were getting contract distilled. That's my understanding of it, or at least that's with the information I have, the way that I've interpreted it. But where they were getting their distillate from and where they were contract distilling through was Four Roses. And it's interesting because some of their older releases were definitely Four Roses multiple recipe blends. And they would talk about their special recipes with their proprietary yeast strains and all this stuff. It was very clearly Four Roses. And everybody knew it was Four Roses. But I'm not sure, because this is non-age stated and because it doesn't say anything other than bottled by Bulleit Distilling Company here on the back. I'm not sure what the contents of this are. This could be some Four Roses contract distillate blended with some of their own distillate. I don't know. But whatever it is, it's definitely reminiscent of Four Roses, and especially in the vein of that higher rye, little bit dusty, little bit dry, but also that florally sweet thing going on there. This reminds me so much of that. When I A/B these, this definitely seems a little bit brighter and a little bit more simple, a little less oaky, because I'm sure it is younger than most of the Four Roses products that I would compare it to, especially the barrel strengths, the single barrel products that do have some age on them. But this is good nonetheless. It's definitely its own thing. It carries that signature Bulleit bourbon spice. They're punchy, cuts through the mix profile. And I think for the $47.99 that I paid for this, there's really probably not a better whiskey out there for the money, in my opinion. I think that there are great things that are around this price point, maybe a little bit above this price point. And there's certainly some lower proof things that I do quite enjoy. They're a little bit less than this, but this is right there in the same price range as those things, and it's just barrel strength, and it's got so much flavor, so much going on for it, and it's still readily available. I mean, these are sitting on the shelves all throughout my area, and I think the most expensive one I've seen was $49.99. So by the time I pay tax on this bottle, I'm well under $60. And for a 750 of barrel strength whiskey that has enough age on it to not have a ton of youth to it into the profile or anything that's really offensive, let alone something that I thoroughly enjoy. I enjoy the high rye. I enjoy those floral notes. I enjoy how punchy this is. And even though it has a couple layers, it's not ridiculously complex. And sometimes it's just nice to drink something that's good, that it doesn't require a ton of thought, and it doesn't really elicit or evoke a ton of thought. You're not sitting there trying to hyper-analyze everything about it. It's just good whiskey. And I think this is one of those bottles for me. And even though I've tried to analyze this and break it down and probably used a whole bunch of words that don't really mean a whole lot, just kind of grabbing at straws here to convey this to you, this, I think, in a nutshell, is just a good value. It's got a lot of flavor. If you like bourbon, if you're okay with a higher rye bourbon, or if you haven't spent a lot of time with higher rye bourbons and you felt like the rye stuff was just way too much, or it just kind of dominated everything. While this is super rye heavy, it also has so much sweetness and so much flavor to carry it. I don't think that for it being such a high rye, that it really has that offensive rye note that most people would get hung up on. So yeah, I don't really have much else to say about it. I'm kind of talking in circles here. I just think this is a great bottle. I can't emphasize that enough. As you can see, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think if this is available in your area and you want a barrel strength whiskey under 50 something bucks, this is the one for you. This is your bottle. It's calling you. It's calling you by name. Whatever your name is, it's saying it. Hey, you know, buy the whiskey, try the whiskey, share the whiskey, have a good time, enjoy what you're drinking. And that's what it's all about, is just finding good stuff, finding what you like. So I appreciate you watching, and cheers.